A very good evening to all our viewers, and welcome to this week's edition of The Agenda. My name is Toiwan Jabela, your host. Tonight we are welcoming back to the show Professor Joseph Diescho, who's a Namibian academic and writer based in Germany, to help us unpack particularly the subject of leadership. There's a lot of leadership contestations usually around many spheres of our society, but are we only contesting for leadership, or do we also understand what leadership is? Professor Joseph Diescho, thank you very much again for making time for the show tonight.
Thank you very much for having me.
Wonderful. Um, Help me again, like I said in the introduction. I want us to talk about the virtues of leadership, the values of leadership, something that a lot of people in our country don't seem to understand. Everybody's contesting for this or that, but if you were to put them on the spot and say to them, what is leadership? A lot of them will be fumbling. What do you think got us here in the first place?
Thank you very, very much, my brother. I'm appreciative that you used the word virtue for a start. In the old and classical teachings about and regarding the phenomenon, if you will, of leadership, there are four virtues that are mentioned as cardinal virtues, around which people formulate and fashion their leadership styles. They are justice, temperance, prudence, and fortitude. And the other word for fortitude is courage. That is, in the real old days when people were trying to theorize about what characteristics a leader must possess. Later on, St. Paul adds three more virtues: faith, hope, and love. So we now have seven cardinal virtues around which we can gauge our leaders and ourselves when we step into the realm of representing others. Now we have come this way where we are really struggling as a nation with an understanding about who a leader is, because we have not defined that. States that cohere and stand the test of time are those that are built upon a set of values. For example, you can quarrel all the way you want with the United States of America, but they have started off their project of building a nation on a particular foundation of value. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all people are born equal and they are given by their creator certain inalienable rights. That's a value, that's a fundamental principle. Now, when you look at our state formation, it's difficult to find and hold on to what the self-evident truths are about who we are as a people in Africa, generally, and as Namibians, given our particular background of division, not only by virtue of colonialism and apartheid. We were divided before. We were never one nation before. So we don't have a formula, a template that we could use to form a nation. That's our fundamental problem. The struggle is a negative, it's pathological, it's an aberration, because the struggle defined us as us versus them. If you are not with me, you are my enemy. If you are my enemy, your life is less virtuous than mine. That's the background.
Wonderful. Um, Now, Prof, we know, for example, right now that, like I said earlier, there's a lot of contestations for leadership positions. in the country, I think the biggest is, of course, the build up to the SWAPO Congress. But if you look around, even in our traditional communities, there are chiefs contesting for positions. A week ago, the University of Namibia had a contestation for student leadership positions, the SRC. But is there a difference between saying, for example, that if I were to become a minister of agriculture, I'll bring water to your village without, I mean, is that an act of leadership, or there has to be, on top of these daily engagements, that there has to be some values on top of that?
In 1982, a political scientist by the name of Jackson, Robert H. Jackson, wrote a book entitled Personal Rule in Africa, wherein he really, as early as that, depicted our fundamental problem in post-colonial Africa. He says, Africa will be debilitated for a long time by a leadership system, a leadership style. It is the crop of leaders who did not emanate and or evolve out of their particular systems and histories to become leaders. What happened was a few of us arrived in New York, petitioned the United Nations, gave us the stamp of approval as the sole and authentic representatives of the people. With that stamp, African leaders go back to their particular countries and say, the UN says we are your authentic representatives. There was absolutely no organic link between the people on the ground and those who are arriving with suitcases as leaders. That says that kind of leadership cannot have empathy with the people. It doesn't come from the people. In other words, the leaders we have in Africa generally would not have been leaders had it not been for colonialism. So their leadership really is thanks to colonialism. Now, if you look at our trajectory, when independence came, we had a very credible leadership of those who came from exile. There was no contestation about who the leader was. We believed SWAPO was the leader. Some parties were there too, but they were lesser leaders. Now, SWAPO is the problem because SWAPO has not evolved organically from the historiographies and specificities, politicities of the communities in Namibia. Therefore, you have leaderships now in Namibia, in other words, leaders who have absolutely no understanding of who the Namibian nation is composed of. Today, my brother, anyone can just hold a video conference of sorts and declare himself a Namibian leader. I am fellow Namibians. I'm going to start this, and that. Now, in biblical times, the question would be, by whose authority do you claim to be a leader? Who gave you the authority to be a leader? In other words, at the heart of our conundrum today is the two fundamental issues, authority and legitimacy. We have leaders who are absolutely not legitimate, and therefore they have no authority to speak for other people. When I come and I said, I'll create water pipes here, I promise you that cooking oil will come out of the water taps. That does not make me, it can make me a situational crisis manager. Leadership is an art of walking in front of other people who believe in you and that you have seen the future, and the future looks brighter than today. And you can convince them, you can inspire them, you can enunciate the kind of value system of the place that you want to lead them to. I have yet to hear from our leaders what the future Namibia holds. In other words, they are struggling not for leadership, but for positions of power. Now, there is a difference between leadership and power. They want power. They don't want to lead. In the local languages of Namibia, starting from the foundational community, Oshiherero, Okunana, that is to pull. Now you can't pull something that you cannot hold on to, whose value you do not understand. In the Awambo communities, they will say okulela, okulela literally means to nurture someone who needs help. Yeah? In the dialects of Kavango, you say mpiterisi, mpitisiri, mgendesi. Mgendesi is the walker in front. In other words, the person must determine the distance between here and there and walks first. Do we hear people who can tell us that they prove Namibia? In other words, really part of our dilemma here is that since independence, we have had a leadership, including SWAPO as such, that was transactional, not transformational or transformative. They never intended to transform Namibia or to build a Namibia that's different from the one they found. They wanted to rule Namibia. As a matter of fact, SWAPO leaders really were hell-bent on SWAPOnizing the country, making the country more SWAPO than Namibia. Hence, we are in this dilemma now. Traditional leaders are now back. The politics of our day is back. In other words, we lack that legitimate leader. And in the absence of that leader that we can all be inspired by and believe in, we resort back to our primordial, primitive, instinctive modes of tribe and ethnicity.
Yeah.
We don't have national leaders.
Do you think, Professor, that the coining and phrasing of some terms such as ruling party are also problematic because clearly there ought to be a difference between ruling people and actually leading them. And what we've seen from time to time is people seemingly ruling more than they are leading.
There is a difference between leadership and rulership. We have so many problematic concepts that we use willy-nilly, and we do not even realize that they create a problem of dividing us further and further. A ruling party. The term comrade. Comrade is a war term, genossen. It's a person that you are in a war with that can pick you up when you hurt, that you care about because you are in a crisis. We are now an independent nation, more than 32 years. Who are we fighting to call ourselves comrades? The moment you use words that divide, you end up as a divided community. In other words, other parties in Namibia, and we have more than 10 really, only one party uses the term comrade. In other words, they are in warfare with other Namibians. We will pay a price for this. Words matter. Concepts matter. Sentences matter. Because words have culture. Words have an attitude. Words have history. No other country that I'm aware of in a post-colonial world are so hell-bent on using phrases that hurt rather than heal. We do not have to use a ruling party. We can say governing party, because there is a difference between governance and ruling. Ruling is ruling subjects, not citizens. citizens are governed according to the laws that they have accepted and internalized. We have not have a leadership that have internalized a leadership ethic to say these are self-evident. When you are a Namibian, you behave like this. Let me give you a very clear example, both in history and in context. The most or the best organized institution in the world today, for better or for worse, is the Roman Catholic Church. It is old, it's set on very, very strict rules and principles. The freedom of the individual is subject to the sacrosanctness of the rules of the institution. In other words, when you go to worship in a church, at the cathedral in Windhoek, or Kuku, or in Nepukiro, what you hear the priest reading from is exactly the same text that every Catholic church in the world is reading from, be it in Venezuela, Cuba, the United States, or even Pakistan. The rules are very clear. We have in Namibia a terrible problem, and that is we are not a rules-based society. We are a preference-based society. We are convenience-based society. We are a comfort-based society. What works for me is good for everybody, and doesn't hold water like that. Why is the Catholic Church so solid? Because it goes back to the original foundation of why the Catholic Church is there. When
Wonderful.
you go to Rome, you go to the church, the Vatican, the big church, it's a really serious church. In the ceilings of the Pope's church, there are words that go back to the beginning of the New Testament. And the words describe the conversation between Jesus and his disciples. When he asked them, "Who do you think I am?" Now, if Jesus of Nazareth would ask his friends who they thought he was, isn't it time for our leaders to ask people, "Who do you think I am?" And in that conversation as such, they didn't know. There was this answer, there was that answer. But Peter, the oldest of the lot, says, I know. You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And Jesus says to him, Peter, you answered correctly, but this answer is not from your heart or from your head. It's from my Father up high. And then here is the foundational, the constitutional principle of the Catholic Church. Jesus says to him, and that's what the words say in the ceiling. Tu es Petrus, thou art Peter, et super hanc Petram, edificabo ecclesia meam. You are Peter, and on this rock I shall build the foundation of my church.
Wonderful.
It's foundation.
Wonderful.
Foundation.
Yeah. No. It's loud and clear, Professor. We go for a quick break and then we return.
Flex is a health and fitness show that focuses on mind, body, and spirit. Flex aims to reach all audiences that would love to focus on the health of the mind, body, and spirit. The show is broadcasted on NTV, 1up2.com, and cross-shared on the following Facebook platforms: The Republikein, Algemene Zeitung, Namibian Sun, Namibian Media Holdings, Sports Rep, Irongo, My Zone, We, and Ewi. Flex focuses on daily fitness, where we will be flexing our muscles, wellness interviews where we will be flexing our mind. For editorial and advertising queries, please contact zone@synergy.com.na.
My.NA Property Show provides viewers with the best-in-class content, engaging interviews, as well as a showcase of the latest property-related products and services. The show is aimed at property enthusiasts, real estate agents, buyers, sellers, financial institutions, and developers. My.NA Properties is broadcast on NTV, 1UP2, and cross-shared on the following Facebook platforms: the Republikein, Namibian Sun, Algemene Zeitung, and Namibian Media Holdings. My.NA Properties focuses on property content and interviews, interior design tips and tricks, DIY shack, and more. For property-related news and advertising, contact my.na@synergy.com.na. My.NA Properties, more than just a roof over your head.
We continue with the agenda with Professor Joseph Diescho. Professor, in your understanding, in your experience, and in your observations, how do you build a state based on political leadership? I'm asking this question because, the word politics, especially in the context of Namibia, has become such a frosty word. Young people don't want to be associated with politics. They will tell you, no, I don't pay attention to politics, because we have scandalized, if I can call it that way, the word. How do we make, I suppose, politics sexy?
I like that question very much, and thank you. Politics, as such, has been corrupted through the ages. The art of political leadership is a noble calling. It's to act in the interest of other people so that their life becomes more meaningful and more livable. You asked me earlier, and let me, with your permission, go back there quickly. How did we get here? We have lowered the bar of leadership in Namibia. We have cheapened the idea of politics. We have corrupted our understanding of our political life. And that's not all due to ill will on the part of our leaders. And here is why. Templates that we use to determine leadership started with the colonial struggles that were very, very fair. In the original days of struggling against the German occupation and the German usurpation of the land, abuse of the indigenous people, it was really to protect the interests of the people. It is in that context that Chief Maharero would write a letter to his friend, that boy. And the letter said, "My friend, it is time for us to set our differences aside and struggle as one, even if we die fighting." In other words, it was not for accumulating wealth. It was not for becoming rulers. It's about defending liberties, the well-being, the safety of the people. Now, that was corrupted with the struggle for liberation, because it's totally understandable. If you look at the model of leadership in SWAPO, there was really no testing who could become a representative of SWAPO here and there. You just had to attend a couple of meetings, and if you occupied the front row all the time and people saw you singing and dancing and screaming things that you did not yourself internalize, you became a leader. And this is still the case right now. Let me go back to my orientation. I'm a political scientist and a theologian, so I speak with judgment. Even Jesus of Nazareth selected only 12 men whom he trained for 3 years to understand his mission, his purpose. Only when they understood who he was and what he was about did he give them the charge to go and turn others towards his belief. As a matter of fact, it gets more interesting. Jesus selected only Jews. It was a tribal organization. There were Africans in the Holy Land at the time. There were Palestinians at that time. There were Greeks. But he chose only a few whom he trusted and who could trust him. What I'm leading to is that we have lowered the bar of leadership by not socializing those who want to become leaders to know what leadership is about. In the latter years of our struggle, particularly after independence, the bar was even lowered more, to the extent that in the transactional political life of SWAPO, Tatekulu Nyoma with the best of intentions would go to a resort somewhere, would be impressed with the services of this white man there, and the following day, the white man gets a call from the State House that he was now the Deputy Minister of Tourism. There are people in Namibia who were shocked when they got the call from the State House that they were going to be Deputy Minister or Minister. Now, if you take me from my village, I don't know why you are calling me to the State House. I arrive there, I wait, and I come in there in my suit, and the president says, you are a good comrade. I'm making you my deputy minister. You are killing me right there. Now, people who are appointed like that, who heard on the radio that they were going to be minister or deputy minister, cannot be leaders. You see, in the classical sense of a state, yeah, Staat, yeah, in the German terminology, it is an organization that controls the resources and that has access to violence in a particular territory. Now, that means that those who are in the business of running state affairs must understand the people that they are governing, must understand the resources at their disposal, must understand the fears, the aspirations, and the background of the people they are governing. I bet you, my brother, if you ask a minister today, how many languages are spoken in Caprivi? They wouldn't know. How many languages are spoken in Kavango? They wouldn't know. I would bet you if you ask the president of Namibia whether he can tell the difference between the Subia vernacular and the Setswana vernacular, he wouldn't know. I am emphasizing this because the art of leadership is about knowing the issues on the ground. My friend, it's very scary when you see the kind of people who represent us. In the classical sense of the state, you can have only about 6 ministries and you can run the state. Defense, justice, home affairs, finance, education, and health. With those, you can run your state. Now, look at this carefully. If you look at the configuration of our Namibian state life, about 80% of the portfolios I mentioned to you right now are occupied by unelected people. People who were wheelbarrowed into parliament. Therefore, they sit in parliament without voting rights. That's a dangerous situation. These people have absolutely no empathy with the people of Namibia. Their interest is to satisfy who? Their appointing master. That's not how states are run. Therefore, if I was running for anything, state president in Namibia, I would first call for constitutional amendment. And one of those first amendments will be to do away with the power of the president to bring people into parliament who were not elected. I would push for an amendment that will say, by virtue of a parliamentary act, the president can only have, say, 15 or 20 ministers. And Parliament determines, as it were, the portfolios. You cannot leave that important configuration, that important definition of culture, political culture, life, economy in the hands of one person. One president has 12 ministers and the other has 32 ministers. What business is that? In other words, I would want to hear from my leaders who are contesting now. Will they change the manner in which Namibia is governed? Not the manner in which their parties are governed. That's neither here nor there. How Namibia is governed.
Wonderful. Just on the, you alluded, you hinted at the concept of autonomy, that so much power is left in the hands of one person in the name of the president, which reminds me of an article that we published in Namibian Sun this week. Quote, it was questions fielded by Joseph Kawandenge in Parliament this week to the Prime Minister, and he was asking about how the president, or who gave the president the right to give a piece of Namibian land, supposedly, to Botswana at the coast for a dry port facility there. I think it's not a big thing. It's not a big land or something like it's hectares of land. I do not know how big it is, but I understood where he was coming from. Some people have said, for example, that borrowing of money from your African development banks, from China and everywhere, that there ought to be some sort of involvement by the citizenry, even if it means through parliament. You just hear that 3 billion has been borrowed by a club of very few people. Do you think that we have allowed too much autonomy in the hands of the state president or just a few officials?
Thank you so very much. I saw that article, and I'm grateful that a member of parliament raised that, Honorable Kawandenge. I'm very grateful for that. See, we really do not understand the business of the state. Maybe we have to accept that we as Africans can govern and rule certain things, but not the state. I say that against the backdrop of appreciating what's happening, not only in my small country, Namibia, but South Africa and any Black African country for that matter. We are going by the politics of the big man. Excuse the pun. Africa was ruled by one person, a king, and the king was above the law. The king had the prerogative to determine whether you could live or die. And some of that is really holding us back even today. Not only was it wrong for the president to give even 1 hectare or 1 tree to a foreign country, that's the responsibility of the National Assembly. Let me make a confession. One of the sins that I've committed and why I made my leader so angry to the extent that I was set for punishment is that I used to say there is no SWAPO government in Namibia. I was told the State House, that's wrong for me to say that. And I said to my chief, I will say it again, there is no SWAPO government. There's only one government, the Namibian government, with SWAPO in the leadership, because SWAPO has been winning the tender consecutively for several years. That's why we have to renew the tender every 5 years. SWAPO is not the government. SWAPO has the responsibility for executive functions. The government of the Republic of Namibia is in the Parliament of the Republic of Namibia, which, by virtue of our composition, is a multi-party government. It is not right for the president to go and cut deals around the world without the knowledge of Parliament, without the approval and the advice of Parliament. In fact, even appointing ministers as such should be the function of Parliament, not just one man. Even the appointment of ambassadors as such should be with the approval of Parliament. When you give that autonomy, not even autonomy, unfettered power to one person, they abuse it. We're all human. They abuse it to the extent that you will have a system where an ambassador in a very prominent country is asked, what is good for our people to go to Namibia for? And this ambassador says, the sand dunes that are air conditioning. That means that person has no clue about what Namibia offers to the international community. Sand dunes. In other words, what I'm really saying here, and it's not raising a criticism, it's suggesting that we should do things differently. Power of the state should go back to the National Assembly. The president has absolutely no business to appoint members of the legislature. And if we don't stop this, we are going to end up with a plutocracy, the business of the rich and the oligarchs, friends of the president, who are taken by fiat to the president, and therefore they only take the instructions from the president. That's what a banana republic is all about. The main characteristics of a banana republic is when institutions don't speak, but individuals speak. When there is no transparency, but control. When there is no predictability. When you leave power in the hands of one person, you cannot predict how he or she would use it. Let's go back to the original purpose of the liberation struggle. To me, be a better place than the one we came upon.
Wonderful. Prof, we go for another break and then we return for the last part of the show.
AgriMonitor is jou weeklikse landbouprogram wat jou die jongste nuus bring oor die landboubedrywighede, produkte, dienste en onderwerpe wat hiermee verband hou. Ons streef daarna om uit te reik na alle boere, landbou- en finansiële instellings, sowel as landbou-entoesiaste. Die program word op NTV en oneup2.com uitgesaai en word ook op AgriMonitor, Republikein en Namibian Media Holdings se platforms gedeel. AgriMonitor fokus op die nuusgesprek, plaastoe, dagbesoek, vleispryse en veilings. Vir enige advertensie of nuusverwante navrae, kontak agrimonitor@synergy.com.na. Kletskompas is 'n Afrikaanse kontinuïteitsprogram met Namibiese nuus en onderhoude. As jy jou handelsmerk of veldtog op hierdie platform wil vertoon, kontak klets@synergy.com.na.
Chill Sessions is an entertainment show bringing the latest hits, fashion, and entertainment news. Chill aims at reaching all entertainers, youth, and artistic fans. Catch Chill on NTV, oneup2.com, the Namibian Sun, Chill, and Namibia Media Holdings platform. Chill focuses on countdown of the latest hits, fashion trends, celebrity interviews, and more. To share your music-related news, products, and services, contact chill at synergy.com.na. Chill Sessions, bringing art and entertainment to the people.
We are back with Professor Joseph Diescho. Professor, you mentioned something very, very important earlier on, and that is lowering the bar of leadership in the country. I think it's a very important conversation to have because historically this country has had proper leaders, starting from pre-colonial era of our country, and even post-colonial. We have produced really some credible and incredible leaders, but that breed is winding out slowly. I mean, there are Toivos, the Nuyomas, the Ngashideko, Moses Shitendero, the Moses Shitenderos, and that group. We don't seem to have a lot of that anymore. What brought us here?
What brought us here is the lack of defining what Namibia was to be. There is no philosophical orientation about the kind of country that we wanted to build. Namibia is without an ideology. Now, you can argue all the way with or against ideology. An ideology is a set of ideas around which a situation is organized. What made Nelson Mandela the most important moral leader that he was? As a matter of fact, Mandela was not a very great president for the Republic of South Africa, but his leadership model is still standing the test of time. Because Mandela would always go back to the original purpose of his getting into politics. I have dedicated my life to the struggle of the African people. I cherish the idea of a free and democratic society wherein all persons, he uses the word persons in April 1964, even Martin Luther King Jr. at the time and Malcolm X at the time were using the word men. We're all men. Mandela says a society in which all persons live in peace and harmony and have equal opportunity. It's an ideal which I wish to live for and achieve. And he turns to Judge Quartus de Wet and says, "My Lord, it is an ideal which, if needs be, I am prepared to die for." That is a set of principles of creating a new South Africa. That's why they're going back to it. There is nothing in our lexology, in our dictionary of politics in Namibia, that tells me where the fire is around which we can coalesce when we argue, when we quarrel, when we disagree. I had this really instructive conversation with Tatekulia Toivo. And he said to me, "My boy, in this country called Namibia, you need to be afraid. You need not to know what you are afraid of. But if you show that you are afraid, you are safer." That's not a value. We've lowered the bar because fear has taken over. And fear, my brother, distorts history. Fear distorts memory. Fear disconfigures society. That's why everybody wants to go to the Central Committee right now. Even those who cannot read and write want to go to Central Committee. By what authority do they arrive at Central Committee? I had this one conversation in 2017 with a new member of parliament who was very excited to be an MP and honorable. And I said I will not say him or her to protect their identity. And this person, I said to the person, but can you really read laws to make laws? And this person says, no, I've just come back from TB Joshua. So people go to TB Joshua, or they used to go to TB Joshua. Now they go to Bushiri, and they come back and they think that the blessing and anointing of Bushiri will make them members of parliament to make laws for a republic. We're in a dangerous zone of witchcraft.
Yeah. Now, yeah, it's a good one, Professor. Do you think? I mean, there's also this phrase of people being drunk on power. You know, people becoming arrogant and complacent in their positions, especially if they have been in that position for too long. In our country, you spoke about the renewal, the continuous renewal of this tender called a 5-year term for the ruling party to rule or govern as we want it to be called. And, you know, having been in power for nearly 33 years, there's been elements from observers that the party hasn't been, it doesn't feel pushed. It doesn't feel the pressure of, if we do not do this, we might lose power. Do you think that state of affairs can also breed complacency, arrogance, you know, detachment from the situation on the ground and what the masses are going through?
Yes, your observation is very accurate. Not only does it breed complacency or arrogance, it breeds a culture of indifference. It breeds a culture of carelessness, mindlessness, meaninglessness, and heartlessness. In other words, the preoccupation is to be in power and to be closer to one who is at the center of the power. It's no longer about serving the people. It's no longer about even understanding the principles of democracy. It's about eating first and eating last, and even eating in the middle. Leadership has to speak to a calling. Why am I here? I had a very telling interview with F.W. de Klerk when he was still deputy president to Nelson Mandela. And I asked him, Mr. de Klerk, when you decided to let go of apartheid with one stroke, because political science teaches that you would have done it piecemeal, release so-and-so, watch the situation, and ban this party, watch the situation. But in your case, you said from this day on, 2nd February 1990, all restrictions on political movement is rescinded. And he looks at me and he says, you are asking me a very tough question. I'll tell you the truth. I was afraid that if I did not do it, the country will sink deeper into a catastrophe which I could not contemplate. And he becomes very honest and he says, I realized that if I didn't do it that time, my people would end up losing everything. And I did not want to be remembered for that. Now, here is a legacy question. I worked with Nelson Mandela, and he would say, try to remember, when you are governing people, when you are deciding on behalf of people, it's a responsibility, it's an honor, it's an act of love. Ask yourself, how do you want to be remembered? I am not sure that our leaders deal with that question at all. De Klerk dealt with that question. There is a word in Afrikaans, vroeg, W-R-O-E-G, vroeg. The loose translation in English is to struggle. It's an internal struggle with yourself. Leaders struggle with that question to say, why am I here? That is why the Afrikaners created the kind of economy in Africa that Africa has never seen. That's why the Afrikaners are still feeding us today. That's why the Afrikaners are still burying us with Avbob. Now they christened it Namibob or whatever it is. It's an Afrikaner building and begrafenis society because they understood. Now, how did they understand that? They understood that God placed them on the African continent with a responsibility. God het ons hier geplaas met 'n taak. Now, a leader who determines that I'm here to fulfill a certain responsibility will behave differently from what we see now today. Last example, my brother, forgive me. The world tells me, literature tells me that Kagame of Rwanda is a better president of Africa than many of our leaders. Why? Because Kagame determined that he's there to fulfill a function, to build a Rwanda that Rwandese people have lost with the genocide in 1994. It's about understanding your people and their culture and their history. Kagame, I'm told, went very deep into the history of the Rwandese people and found a phrase that he used to mobilize a new emotion, a new feeling, a new sentiment, a new self-understanding. Imana ahandiyirigwa ikarara mugwanda. Literally translated, this is very deep. In the Kinyarwanda language of old, the proverb says, God works everywhere in the world during the day, but he comes to sleep among Rwandese people. In Rwanda. With that self-understanding, you turn to your other person, to your neighbor, your brother, your sister, as his or her keeper. That's not what we do in Namibia. We are enemies towards one another. We do not have an organizational principle, as it were, to bring us together. That principle that Maharero enunciated in 1904. My brother, it's time we set our differences aside. I know we are different. I know we speak different languages. I know sometimes we are not all reliable, but it's time to set that aside and unite together. Is that not what SWAPO was about? And where did things go wrong? Things went wrong because we become greedy. It is wrong for ministers to acquire farms which they go to on weekends. Farming is not a hobby. Politics is not a hobby. Politics is a calling, is a vocation. Do we have political leaders who are called to serve, or do we have leaders who use politics to become wealthy? I leave
Wonderful.
that question to the young people. And the young people, don't get carried away that young people are better leaders because of age. Age is not a marker of leadership. Age is not a competency. Age is not, to be young is not a qualifier that you're better than others. There is a proverb in Mali, in the language of Bambara. It says, an old man sitting down sees much farther than a young man standing up. Sometimes those who are older have seen more, have experienced more, have lived longer, have suffered more, and we can learn from that.
Wonderful. Professor Joseph Diescho, it's always a pleasure and really educational to engage you, and this was no exception. Thank you a lot for your time, and we'll continue to have conversations as time continues.
Thank you so very much.
That
Namaste.
Namaste.
Kulupa no mesho. Umayota tutasini.
Tangita de Guru. That was Professor Joseph Diescho engaging us from Germany tonight. Thank you for watching, and have a good night.